Welcome, greetings. We're here today with a very special guest, Gus Castellanos, who's joining us for Views of the Field, brought to you on Sing to the Mountain Studio and also on Facebook. Okay, well, welcome, Gus. It's such a pleasure to have you here today. Thank you.
Thank you.
Yeah, beautiful. So if you're viewing us on Facebook, please be sure to hit subscribe and click the bell on Sing to the Mountain Studio, as I think right now we're 4 subscriptions away from where we'd like to be, so you could bring us to that point. We're also being joined live with our Mindful Teacher community on Zoom here. And it's great to see everybody. Welcome. Thanks for joining us here. So Gus, I'd really like to look at your work today and have us explore your path into the field as up close and personal as you choose to get. And I'd like to begin with kind of a style that I haven't explored yet in these sessions, which is, remember the Actors Studio, the TV show Inside the Actors Studio? Did you ever see that?
I remember the name. I don't remember if I saw it.
Yeah, there was a host for that name, James Lipton. And he would have a very unique style of kind of interviewing people. And he would begin with, in this way, kind of going through people's resume or, film history in his case, and their acting history. So let's see if we can recreate that a little bit. Gus is a retired neurologist. Okay, so I'll pause here. Gus, when did you retire?
Yeah, with a little help with other people, I retired in 2006. Used to be a tired neurologist. Now I'm retired. So.
Well, I'm glad you're feeling more rested. You participated in your first MBSR course in 1998.
Correct.
Who is your teacher?
There's a woman here in town. So I'm in Jupiter, Florida, a small town north of Miami, etc. She was a nurse that became a Buddhist. I don't think she was like a nun or anything, but she ran a Tibetan Buddhist temple in town, and she's trained at UMass in the mid-90s. And so she lived in town, and that's who became, her name was Mimi Bailey.
Mimi Bailey. Okay, is she still teaching?
No.
Okay, wonderful, thank you. So you trained and are certified through UMass.
Yes.
Probably, were you with Melissa in Florence at the time?
I was fortunate to catch my first training was with John and Saki at the Mind Body at Mount Madonna. And then my next training, which was the, what was it called? The first level training at UMass, the 9-day practicum, was with Melissa in Florence. Actually, it was Melissa's last thing at UMass before she went off.
And I probably should mention their full names. That's Melissa Blacker and Florence Melio Meyer. Yeah. And then I find this really interesting. You also trained with the Amishi Jaws Mindfulness-Based Attention Training Program at the University of Miami.
Yes.
So not being as familiar with that program as I am with MBSR, what was that like?
The program, she designed the program because she started getting the fundings from the Department of Defense. And so knowing that the military would not likely, I think there was already an 8-week program. But anyway, she wanted to reduce it, used her research background to find that the minimum would be 12 minutes a day of daily practice. And somehow she came up with 8 hours of classroom time. So it was a 4-week program, 2 hours a week for 4 weeks with 12 minutes of daily practice. It turned out that right when this program was she had sort of modified it with a friend of mine, that's her colleague, Scott Rogers. We're just starting to develop it, and they asked me to join. This was in 2014. And we ended up doing an interesting project, which I can talk about if you want, but I'll wait for there. So anyway, that's when I started helping out with that and just did a couple of research projects with her.
Yeah. Well, if it's here, I'm happy to hear about that interesting project.
Yeah, I think it may be useful for those of us that are teaching MBSR. So in bringing me in, one of the things that they noticed right on was how do you scale something up? Including how would you scale up this program? It'd be nice to be able to say I got thousands of mindfulness in her program MBAT teachers, and we're going to put them into the military. So we came up with the idea of we will train the trainers. And so Scott and I, as we were kind of shaping up this 4-week program, had nine psychologists from the military join us, and over a period of 9 months, we trained together. We trained each other on this program, and then the research. Amishi was very smart, I think, on this. She said, "You know what? Why don't we do this? We will have Gus teach 3 classes at one base, one Army base, 3 different classes, 3 different sets of soldiers. So I think it was 20 each, and then 1 psychologist each teaching another class." Another 3 class. So we would have a comparison of me teaching the class as she called the mindfulness expert, compared to see how these people we just trained, to see if it can be scaled up. And I say it's interesting because the results showed that those guys did better than I did. And that's how it's published without using my name, thankfully. But she showed that the psychologists, sports psychologists, and of course, what we all came to the conclusion is, I'd never been in the military. And, I'm very supportive. I've worked at many VAs, and I've taught many veterans and in the military, got an eye opener, but I couldn't identify and relate that much, as opposed to someone who's on base with them that they know, who is usually the psychologists were military people who were now psychologists. So we think that was the issue. It was not so much the experience of the teacher, but the ability to identify with the students that made the difference. So
yeah, well, thank you for sharing that. That's really interesting. We probably could spend the rest of the time talking about the military and mindfulness and programs involved with that. Thank you. That's wonderful, and I would like to explore that at some point. So we'll have to have you back. So you're also an adjunct instructor at Nova Southeastern University. What does that entail?
Well, I got actually hired right at the beginning of the pandemic. A friend, actually, I was introduced, or I got to know through Valerie's connection. Valerie, who's here today, James Pond, who's a PhD. It has to do with programs, the PhD candidates and things like that. I don't really know his exact title, but he called me up and said, "Hey, we need some mindfulness. These students are freaking out," right in March of 2020, and we just do some sessions. I said, I'd be happy to do some sessions, free sessions. We'll just get them on Zoom and stuff. And that rolled into, well, we may have some funding for a research project. Let's do something. And the cognitive neuroscientist, that's actually a colleague of Amishi's, so new Amishi's. And so the connection came in. We came up and designed a 6-week program. Instead of just offering random classes, we came up with a 6-week program, which I based mostly on my Mbsr course, which is my primary thing, and the MBAT together. And we did these, I held these 6-week online courses, 1 hour a week. The home practices were 12 to 20 minutes. And we ran 7 classes all the way through spring of 2021, students, faculty, and staff. And the research was able to collect data before and after. So that's how I got hired for Nova and put on as an adjunct. They did ask me to teach I've never taught college, by the way, and they did ask me to teach a college class. When they call me, I'll say there's a slight story. So some of you know my background, but The guy calls me up and says, "Oh, we need the teacher for this class is going. This is October. So it starts in January. She's not going to be here. We need your help. Can you teach this class?" I go, "I've never taught." He goes, "Oh, no, it's a piece of cake. Don't worry. She'll walk you through it." I go, "What's the class?" He goes, "Well, it's the neuropharmacology of illicit drugs." And so I said, "Okay, well, that's okay." And by the way, I was hired. So it was like a perfect thing, but I was hired by the School of Criminal Justice. So I said, I kind of have to do this. The School of Criminal Justice, of all people, is hiring me, and I'm doing something on the neuropharmacology of illicit drugs. So for those that don't know my story, you may not relate to this, but
well, let's come back to that. We'd love to hear, your origin story. So I appreciate you bringing this up. Just to finish this James Lipton part of the interview, even though you most interestingly to me, and I think bravely and courageously, bring mindfulness work into the state prison system. So maybe we'll circle back around to this too, but just briefly, what does that entail?
Yeah, so I'd like to start off by welcoming Scott May, who's here, who's now going to join me in offering that. We were supposed to go this Friday, but there was another lockdown due to violence, which happens in prisons, by the way. So in 2010, I got approached by a local Zen group. I had just started teaching Mbsr, the Southern Palm Zen group in Boca Raton, and they had been going to a local prison in the middle of the state by the Lake Okeechobee. And they were offering Zen, and they had heard about mindfulness. They said, "Zen's working out pretty well, but we think mindfulness can be helpful." And what they actually said to me is, "Teach us to teach MBSR. Tell us how to teach MBSR in a prison system." And so I said, "You know what? It's maybe better if I ran an MBSR course for your group, and then we can decide." And that's what we did. And after that MBSR course, two women in the Zen group and myself got together, and we modified. One of the women had experience with MBCT. So my experience, MBSR, hers, and MBCT came together. The other one was one of the Zen persons. We came together and we modified it, the program, and we did an 8-week course based on that, with all the different allowances that have to be done for prison. So that was in 2011, and like I'm used to, after MBSR course, having an ongoing routine practice for them. So the Zen group that was going out once a week offered one of their sessions twice a month for the mindfulness. So it was alternating Zen one week, mindfulness, Zen, mindfulness. And we started doing these so-called drop-ins for the next few years. What was really great for us was that one of the inmates that unfortunately was a lifer took it on because he really found benefit. He really liked it, and he became the leader of the group. And so he was the one that corralled everybody and kind of got things organized from inside when we showed up. And we would run these sessions twice a month. And eventually we actually started just going in, and they were running the show. They were leading the practices, leading the inquiry. We were there to kind of make sure they didn't go off the rails or bring it back when it's necessary, answer questions. So it really became rewarding and interesting. And by the way, at the pandemic, the Zen, the volunteers from the Zen group all dropped out. So now we're coming once a week. So
you're back, and Scott's going to join you. Yeah, wonderful. I think it just takes such a special person to be able to go into the prison system. I know I'd be challenged by it. How about Fleet Mall? Are you familiar with his? I'm sure you are, but are you associated with him in any way?
Yeah, he's my unofficial mentor. Okay. So I know, for those that don't know, he served 18 years in the federal system. And in that, by the way, in the 80s, he was the one that came up with the prison hospice, first prison hospice back in the 80s, early 90s. But at the same time, also the Prison Mindfulness Institute started when he was still in the mid 90s. And then when he came out in the late 90s, continued the prison mindfulness. And that's more or less when I started got interested in that work of his. And I've reached out to him a number of times because there's he's evolved from prison mindfulness and now something engaged mindfulness and doing all kinds of stuff. One of which is offering programs to the corrections officers. And now it's all first responders. And we've been trying to get the corrections officer at the prison we're in more involved with this and the staff and such. So we were communicating with him a number of times. And then I joined his Heart Mind Institute, which is sort of how you call it, an organization that we come together, and he has monthly coaching classes. He has a whole bunch of offerings and things like that. So I do quite a bit of work with him and his group.
Yeah. And of course, UMass had that study that was going on in the prison system at one point in Massachusetts. So, yeah. Well, congratulations. That's just such needed and heartfelt work for you to be able to go into their state prison system. Florida has so much going on. And Valerie, as you mentioned, is here. Valerie York Zimmerman, who has been a big supporter of my work and brought a lot of the people who are here on Zoom with us now and have been from South Florida and Miami to our sessions and introduced me to them. So I just want to thank Valerie. And Valerie, you'll be with us. I know you're not on screen right now, but just to say Valerie will be with us in a little while. And we'll be talking with her. So thank you, Valerie. Okay, well, let's see. Then there are other mindfulness projects that you're involved with that maybe we'll touch on. It just seems like there's so much. So, I'll drop the James Lipton interview style and just say I'm really happy that you're involved in so much for you and the field. And, being a young man like me, you've got a long way to go. So many, many, many more years of working in all the ways that you are. All right. Well, Gus, let's drop all of that interview type of stuff now that we know how vast the work is that you do, and maybe come into a pause for a moment, if you'll join me in a pause. Thank you. So, if we look at back in your life, back on the origins of your finding mindfulness in that MBSR program, and maybe even before then, maybe you could unpack all of this vast work that you're now engaged in terms of how it began.
Yeah, thanks. And I appreciate the question. I wasn't sure if you were going to go here. I remember the first interview or so-called session like this you did with Cooley. Cooley's began with something about her father, the father's influence. And my usual thing when people say, hey, how'd you come to mindfulness, blah, blah, blah. I say, I did my MBSR in 1998, and here's why. But when Cooley was talking, I remember something. So I was in medical school at the University of Miami in the 70s, and I'm not sure why. I heard there was a guest lecturer coming to talk about meditation. And at that point, I was kind of leaning toward neurology, not that that had any correlation to me, but I said, meditation, I think I'm interested. I said, oh, wait a minute, the Beatles. I know, that's something the Beatles did. I should go do this. So I went to this lecture. And looking back, I think it was, I don't remember the details, but what I remember was it was something about, I think, the relaxation response. I believe it was a Herbert Benson thing. And for those that don't know Herbert Benson, the cardiologist who just passed away. He started, last week.
Last week? Oh my.
In his 90s. He borrowed from Transcendental Meditation to offer this relaxation practice for his patients, heart patients and high blood pressure and stressed out. And it was at Harvard when John Kabat-Zinn was at UMass and such. So I think that's what that was, because I remember it was a very relaxing, it was guided imagery, it was taking deep breaths and this kind of thing. And I took to it and I started practicing that a little bit for the next few years. But why I bring about the father is because my father, who happened to be a professor of cardiology at the medical school, I went to, hey, Dad, I went to this class in meditation, not thinking he was interested in any of this like that. And a week later, he gave me this gigantic book of research done by the Transcendental Meditation group on the brain. On their things, and it was like 200 pages. Each page contained a report, sort of an abstract of EEG work or behavioral measures or something. And so something there with my father, and he gave me this book with the research, the neuroscience of meditation, and I did that. And while I practiced it for a little while, then I graduated. I did my internship, which is very, very challenging, on call every third night and all that bit. And then I got married and started raising a family. So I stopped practicing meditation. And so I say all this because I didn't, I've kind of lost my awareness until this group met with Cooley a couple of weeks ago. And sure enough, so I go on, I do my residency and all that. I come settle in Jupiter in the late 80s, establishing a practice, neurology and sleep medicine, actually, and raising a family. And that's when I start having my professional stress. It was not so much personal stress, nothing that you wouldn't expect raising small kids and working. But I was having a lot of issues with my relationship with the healthcare system, is the way I put it. At this point, it's very tempting I could very much go back, looking back, and say it was burning out. Emotionally exhausted for sure. I was becoming very cynical, which are some of the symptoms of burnout. But no one called that back then. There was no talk about physician burnout or physician wellness. There was no one I could turn to or go to social media and find other people. And also something I've just learned about in the last year, and actually gave a talk on recently to medical students on mindfulness for the imposter syndrome, which is something that's very common apparently in medical students or perfectionists, high achievers, those people. Yeah, so I think that was influenced me. And of course, I had no awareness of that. I just didn't. And I was not the most mature person anyway. So I tended to have not so well-adjusted coping mechanisms, if you will. But one of the things I did, and this is where I think it gets into the imposter syndrome, that the worse that my work got, the worse the pressures were on top of me, the more I dove back into work to fix it. I said, if the system is caving in on me, I need to go out and fix the system. And again, I didn't have, we were back then more independent types. Doctors, I had colleagues, I had people I worked with, but I didn't have a mentor. I didn't have a group. I didn't have a men's group to talk to. It was just, I'm going to go in there and battle it in. And I found other people that were battling who were just as dysfunctional as I was. So that was one problem. And of course, that led to more burnout. And then the other problem was that I started to help myself to the pharmaceutical samples I got in the office. And if any of you know anything about sleep medicine and neurology, that you would imagine that I would get the goodies. I mean, if you're into that world of drug addiction, I had a candy store for you. So I had the sleeping pills like Ambien. I had the benzos like Xanax and Ativan. I had barbiturates. I had stimulants, and I had opiates. And I stayed away from the opiates because I thought they were addicting. Not the other stuff, though, as much as I popped them. So I misused them, abused them, got dependent on them, if you will. My wife started noticing the problems. I would pass out and black out, forget what I did the night before if I took too many pills. Wouldn't do it during the work and all that. I mean, I was maintaining a high-end practice, lots of patients, and doing well financially. But she was starting to get upset and said, "You should go get help. You need treatment." I go, "No, I'm a neurologist. I know what I'm doing. I treat people like me." But that's when my friend brought MBSR to Jupiter. 98. He said, Gus, could you send, he actually asked me to refer patients. Send your insomniacs, send your pain patients. There's research, University of Massachusetts School of Medicine. And he also invited me to join the class. He said, you should probably join the class. You don't look too well these days. So I did take the class at that point and saw some benefit, but I saw some benefit. Things were starting to improve. And then a few months later, I stopped practicing. Life got in the way that whole bit. And some traumatic events happened at work. So I thought, same old stuff. And that's when I started getting more into the opiates. I really started abusing the opiate samples. And then they cut the samples off. And then I started going through the withdrawal type thing. So I started writing prescriptions for myself, which for those that don't know, that's illegal. It's called drug diversion. Yeah, not supposed to be doing that. But that triggered so much anxiety. Walking into the different pharmacies, and it's the pharmacist, and they recognize me with the hoodie on and all that. And then getting the pills, and then that triggered so much shame. Because shame, I knew this was terrible. And the best way I found to handle that was more opiates. So I started spiraling out of control. And I was going along doing that for 1 year, 2 years. And then suddenly I ran into a pharmacist, and I'll make this part of the story short. And he saw me do this a couple times to his pharmacy. And one of the times he called me back and he said, come back, I got to talk to you. And I go, oh no, I'm in trouble. And I kind of was. When I came back though, he gave me a bottle of 300 Vicodin. And Vicodin are one of these opiate things. He says, here, take these so you don't have to keep coming back so often. 300 of these pills. And I was back in 2 weeks. And at that point, for the next 2.5 years or so, my opiate addiction just got out of control. It really got bad. And so, really everything then started falling apart. You could see it at work, especially at home with my wife. My kids were in high school going to college, so we were distancing anyway, naturally, but they could tell. All kinds of problems, as you imagine, physically. I wasn't sleeping well, that whole bit. I was so dependent on the pills. And I was getting these pills from this guy anytime I wanted. Day or night, before work, after work, Saturdays, I'd call him up at 4 in.the.morning with some excuse always. Oh, my mother, oh, it's an emergency, oh, it's a patient. Okay, come to the office. He would just give them to me. So unbeknownst to me, I thought he was just wanting referrals. So anyway, long story short, I took MBSR again because that was my way out. I still wasn't going to go to treatment. And that's when I got enough awareness to say, I can't live like this. I can't kill myself. I can't live with the pills. I can't live without the pills, really hitting that point of despair. So I decided to detox myself. And in my brilliance, when I detoxed myself, I ended up overdosing. And so when I overdosed, I was taken to the hospital, Jupiter Medical Center, where I was the head of the sleep center, senior neurologist, started a stroke center. I was known, I was well known. It's a small hospital. And I know enough about small hospital. The confidentiality, HIPAA regulations aside, privacy confidentiality, I knew everybody knew. And then some nurse said to me, you were a maniac. You were screaming and yelling. We couldn't keep you down. So I knew the gig was up. And so at that point, I surrendered into whatever they wanted me to do. So I went to treatment, and that was 18 years ago. And I've been clean and sober ever since. So it worked out in a way. However, that was only the first part of the story. The second part of the story is that the pharmacist, again, unbeknownst to me, had been using my name and medical license to commit insurance fraud to the tune of $2 million. And so, I wasn't the only one. There was a couple of other doctors he was doing it like that apparently he was making deals with them. But apparently he had 100 doctors that he was doing this. So he just used my name a lot because obviously I could see what he was doing. So when the DEA and the FBI all came down, they came to him, they found me, they had to include me on the case. When I told them what it was about and my side of it, they seemed to believe me. They really said, okay, we didn't know that, but we still have to include you. And so I said, okay, took the deal anyway, which is something maybe I shouldn't have done. But anyway, at that point, it was the right thing to do, we felt. I had a lawyer, of course. And so I was expecting things to be okay-ish until I got in front of the judge. And the judge, when he heard the story, said, oh, that's a great story. However, you're a doctor. You should know better. So you need to go to prison for 3 years, and you need to lose your license, and you need to help pay back that $2 million. So it was a little bit of a pivot that I wasn't expecting. And that's when I say when I retired with the help of the DEA and the FBI and the DOJ. So thank you, which was actually not a bad thing for me to do. But between the time I had my overdose and walking into prison, I had 2.5 years of being clear-headed and things going very well. And I was involved in the 12-step programs and other spiritual work. And I was meditating 30 minutes a day, doing an hour of yoga 5 times a week. These are things I shared with my wife, by the way. And so things were getting better. So literally when I was walking into prison that day I surrendered going into prison, I was not feeling that upset. I was somewhat at ease. I don't want to call it equanimity was there, but I certainly wasn't panicked or, playing the victim. I wasn't thrilled, don't get me wrong. And then I went into prison and I ended up serving 23 months, 2 years. And in prison, the main thing I did was I meditated 4 to 5 hours a day, did an hour of yoga, found other meditators. We formed a group. And for a period of 6 to 7 months, we met every single night, Sunday through Saturday, every single night before lights out, and meditated together as a group for an hour on top of the ones I was doing on my own. So I call those 2 years my razor wire retreat, because they were really now looking back was felt. I wasn't intending to it, and I didn't have a live teacher, but I did have others that helped out. And so when I came out, I didn't know what I was going to do. I hadn't worked a day in my life except for being a doctor, which I could never do again. And I got introduced to somebody who lives in Palm Beach, a very wealthy woman, who was on the board of the Center for Mindfulness. Mm-hmm. And she said, you got nothing to do. Why don't we go? I'll get you plugged in. I know John and Saki and this and that. So that's how I got started, since I already knew MBSR and things like that. So, and that's how I started teaching. And she had some connections at different places. One was a treatment center. That was the first place I started holding mindfulness classes. And one was at the University of Miami Medical School, or my alma mater. And so we did an MBSR. She and I taught an MBSR class down at the medical school in 2010. And then she got me plugged in with some nonprofits, and that's how I started going until she moved out of town. And then the rest of it was what happened. It was not my doing. It just unfolded in a way that I would have never expected or planned out, certainly compared to the way I was before. You go to high school, you go to college, you go to a medical school, you go to internship, residency, you do this, then you retire. That whole linear life went wild, and this life has just been all over. But I do feel much better, by the way. And the reason also to come back to the prison, I know what it feels like to have outsiders. When you're living 24/7 with the same people, any visitor is really good. But being able to communicate and talk with people from the outside, not just on phone, like your phone, or just your family with visitation, because there's so much complications going on, as you can imagine, with the families. But having us people like this, and since I've been in, and I can go in there with these guys, it really helps me. Let's put it that way. So that's my story, and it's sticking to me. So.
Yeah, thank you, Gus. Along with the courage and bravery that it takes to go into prison, I think it's equally as brave and courageous to share a story like that with us and others that will view it. What would you wish for others to take from this?
Yeah, I appreciate you asking, because usually I have to sort of interject it. But number one, maybe we're hearing it again, but all this about opioid overdoses and people dying and all this. So I want to point out that I'm an opioid overdose survivor. We do survive, and we do get healthy, and we do clean up and, make our amends and repair. So it's not always a disaster, but it's worth doing. And number two, what I try to also emphasize, and I always suggest, and I'm suggesting it to you all and whoever's out there listening, I am happy to help out. It really is not a bother, and it really is good for me to help you, whether it's a problem with substance use, the overdose, or going to prison, or losing a career. There is life after prison. There is life after medicine. This is not that this is such a great thing, and not to say that you'll be able to do what I do or whatever, but not to give up, not to be so glum and depressed, especially when you're going through it. Because that's one of the things I really learned while doing time and what we teach in our classes, to take care of the present moment. Be aware of the tendency to be wishing things and hoping too much and that kind of thing. So
if somebody's listening, thank you, Gus. If somebody's listening and they're caught up in some form of addiction, opioid or other, what would you say the most valuable first next step is?
Yeah. Well, reaching out for help. Now, obviously, healthy people, if they know any, but it doesn't have to be somebody that is had an addiction problem. It could be because my wife helped me out a lot. She's got no addictive properties, and by her wanting to leave me, actually, was a trigger for me to go try, and that's when I started to detox myself. But really reaching out, because this is a battle, especially with the opiates and the way they're now laced with all these stronger stuff. It is real hard to do this on your own. So whether you go to a recovery program or a church faith-based program or a family member or a therapist, whatever it may be, reach out for help for sure.
Thank you. And if somebody wants to reach out to you, you are open for that?
Oh, yes.
Yeah, and we'll have the link to your website at the bottom of the recording, and they could reach you from your contact information there.
Yeah, my website, it's innerinmate.com, and there's a contact form. And it's inner inmate because I know many of you have inner childs you deal with, but I have an inner inmate I deal with. Yeah. So innerinmate.com is my website. So.
Oh, thank you. Yes, appropriately named. And, I don't feel any sense of any imposter syndrome left in you. I just think you are
Thank you.
Open in being able to share this. Thank you. And I'm curious, in a different tact within, I'd like to take a different tact within my curiosity around your total involvement in the field in the ways that you are. And being a former neurologist, are you keeping up with the latest neurological research that comes out?
Yeah, I try to keep up with all the research, but as you all know, it's becoming more and more exponentially. There's a lot, so it's hard to. Yeah, so I have those summaries like from David Block's group at UCLA, the American Mindfulness Research Association, and another group out of Europe. That list, they try to keep updated, but it's hard. But yes, definitely, and I do favor the brain stuff.
So what can you inform us or bring insight to us on the latest research, in what it's showing with mindfulness practice or just in consciousness studies in general?
Yeah, and not only with the mindfulness, but people even like Judd Brewer, some of you know Judd Brewer, the neuroscientist, addiction psychiatrist of all things at Brown now. They're doing a lot of work on my meditation, long-term meditation for people with reaching these concentrative states, so-called jhanas, as well as non-dual states, and finding some things there. But along the lines of the mindfulness, I've always tried to keep an open awareness on more of a general thing, because as the research becomes more refined and technology advances, the imaging and all of that, you can just see what's going to happen if you're going to study somebody, let's say for anxiety, and you're going to do brain scans on before and after a mindfulness program. They're going to be looking for anxiety-related brain changes, not just global changes. But I try to keep more on the global ones because I still favor MBSR's tendency to bring in, to allow all comers with all kinds of issues, as opposed to specific groups or specific diseases, which is nothing wrong with that. I've done plenty of that. But being able to speak to an audience that has all kinds of different stresses and problems and diseases and issues, and say the brain tends to change in this direction or that direction, that kind of thing. And then there is, of course, the tendency to follow Amishi's sort of line of work, which is more cognitive skills. So I follow that a little bit, the cognitive skills mostly being attention, concentration, wandering mind, working memory, that kind of thing.
Yeah. Thank you. Where do you see the field moving?
Is this MBSR in particular or the whole field?
I don't know. Well, I don't know how to frame that. So I'll just let you choose.
Okay. Well, one for sure, because I kind of thought you would ask, given the previous sessions, that I got fortunate enough to be one of the MBSR teachers for Mindful Leader, which is mindfulleader.org, which is an international organization. And they brought on MBSR at the beginning of the pandemic, and they have really widening it out. We have 8 to 10 MBSR classes a month, and usually 20 to 25 people per class. And so we've now gone 2 years of that. So they've really gone out. I was a little surprised that they would fill with that many people ongoing now. But as sometimes I note, the pandemic has been good for mindfulness and stress reduction. So I think that has some room, more room than I was thinking. However, the field as a broader sense, the different variations, the different mindfulness-based programs and the apps, of course, and then the books and then the podcasts and all of that, I see it going in that direction of, so Judson Brewer's digital therapeutics, now using the apps a little bit more therapeutically rather than Headspace or Calm, just to calm down or to learn something. I use the Sam Harris's Waking Up app. So there's a lot of good teachings on there, but you can find those online on YouTube and such. So I see it continuing to broaden out. And of course, that risks the so-called mindfulness types, where people become whatever for the wrong reasons, claiming things are mindfulness or converting mindfulness into something it isn't. And more people that are experiencing it and finding use, that they will be practicing and offering it informally to people around them. And so we're creating sort of this thing, I'm hoping, which is something that we need, more of that awareness. And since so much of this has to do with mental health, for sure we're going to need this. If we need it now, but certainly with everything happening from the pandemic. And so I can just see it's not going. And when I worked with Amishi and saw her work and saw how much funding she had, and then started looking at the research, I kind of had a sense that mindfulness was here to stay for a while, for a long time. Just because when people are so invested in making money on it like that, and I mean that in a positive sense, if their career is based on grant funding and such like that, but hopefully it shapes up and the research is getting better. And the the modifications as they come up, like when David Treleaven's trauma sensitivity, and then all the cultural inclusivity, diversity aspects to it too. I see all that happening. So I just see it keep rolling along, that kind of thing.
Well, there's a lot going on, and you're involved in a lot of it. And I think that's a wonderful thing for the field and for all of us. So I deeply appreciate you being here today to share this in this personal way. And I just want to thank you and welcome you back at some time to check back in, maybe look at the prison work more closely. But thank you so much, Gus. Wonderful to have you here today. Thanks for sharing.
Sure. No, thank you, Allan. I do have to say thank you for what you're doing, because I caught on to these groups right at the beginning of the pandemic, and they have been so beneficial for me, so rewarding, so helpful to share with all of you. And of course, your good work, Allan, and then Mike and Mark and everybody else who helps out. But it's just been a real godsend, truly, to be part of this group. So appreciate it. Appreciating to help out in any way I can for you. So thank you.
Well, thank you. And you have been very supportive in your donations. And I want to segue to that as a close. That if you're watching this at some point in the future, there will be a donation link down at the bottom of the recording, and any donations are appreciated. As Gus said, it is, in our view, a way of supporting the work and keeping us going in it. So it's becoming a $1 billion industry. It is over a couple of $1 billion as an industry. And I appreciate you, Gus, in saying that is not necessarily a bad thing. You know, we need the finances to continue our work, all of us. So thanks again, Gus. And next week, we're going to have a really interesting guest, Carson Marshall, who's also brought to us by Valerie York Zimmerman in the way of her introducing Carson to us and to me. He is a world-renowned classically trained violinist who's doing work with music and mindfulness in a very fascinating way of looking at stress response and how music can inform people and bring awareness of it to them. So it's going to be quite a different session next week. We'll have a live performance from Carson, and we're really looking forward to it. So we hope you can join us for that. And with that, if you're on Zoom and you can stick around, Gus is open to being with us for the remainder of the session if you have any questions or comments for him. So thank you all.
Click down below to join our Mindfulness Teacher Community Facebook group, where you're also invited to post and share. Also, subscribe to Sing to the Mountain Studio so you don't miss out on future recordings of live sessions.